Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight. My name is Meg Wheeler. I'm the Democratic candidate running for state Senate here in Massachusetts in the Plymouth and Norfolk District. And I am very glad to be here tonight for this really important conversation on reproductive justice, and more specifically, the Roe Act, which is an important piece of legislation here in Massachusetts. And I'm very honored to have a special guest with me. Maureen Butt from Planned Parenthood is going to be joining me in one moment. I'm going to bring her on the screen here, and we're going to have a conversation about the Roe Act, because I know that there have been a lot of questions about this, especially in the wake of the death of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So I'm going to bring her on. Hello.
Hi, Meg.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Of course.
So let's go ahead and dive in, if that's okay. We've got an hour and I want to make the most of it. And I'm just really excited to hear what you have to share with us and kind of help educate us all on the Roe Act, because this really is an important piece of legislation that is still very much active up at the State House, and we need to get passed. So I thought we would actually kick it off by maybe just giving a little bit of a broader overview of kind of what the current state of reproductive justice here is in Massachusetts. Because I think there's this perception that we're Massachusetts, and Roe versus Wade was passed in the 70s. We're good. So are things great here? Are we doing great?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. We are not doing so great. And let me I'm just going to just take a moment back. So I am the Associate Policy Director of Policy and Government Affairs at Planned Parenthood Advocacy Fund. And we endorse candidates, and we are so excited to endorse you. And so that's why I'm here. And full disclosure, today was actually a day off. I was foliage watching with my family, but I really wanted to be here to have this conversation with you. So I'm really excited about your candidacy. You are a Planned Parenthood Advocacy Fund endorsed candidate, and you are endorsed because you understand the importance of reproductive and sexual health, and in Massachusetts in particular. So I'm happy to answer any questions about the landscape. So let's talk about the landscape. So we all know nationally in 1973, Roe v. Wade passed the Supreme Court, and it said, it kind of made a ceiling for abortion rights and said there's a ceiling, there's a floor, and states can do what they want to do. Well, immediately after that, our state legislature, primarily male, primarily men, and primarily Catholic, passed a law in 1974, and they put all these barriers in place for abortion access. The laws that we are currently seeing since 1974 have all been in place. And so the Roe Act is really to remove some of those barriers that are there that are restricting women's and people's access to abortion care in Massachusetts. So that's literally what we're trying to do.
So, okay, so I'm curious about some of these barriers. So, I mean, talk to me about, what it's like to get an abortion, to have access to abortion care here in Massachusetts. I mean, what are some of the barriers that people face if that's something that they decide they need to do?
Yeah, so there's a lot of barriers that are part of that law that we need to just clean up. They're not enforced. So there's like a 24-hour waiting period that's not enforced, but it's on the law books that we should get rid of that. Right. So that's a barrier that does not need to be there. There's two other buckets of barriers that we really talk about. Right now, we have a limit in Massachusetts that there are no abortions after, I believe it's after 22 weeks. And I haven't spoken about this in a while, but I will confirm that. And so we are making an exemption for after 24 weeks in the cases of lethal fatal anomalies. So right now, if you are a person who finds out that they have a fetal fatal anomaly, you will have to go to another state if you have the means, tens of thousands of dollars to get the healthcare that you need. You're leaving the state to go get the healthcare. Many people go to Colorado that's where they go. And so imagine now during a pandemic getting to Colorado to get the care that you need.
So I just want to pause there because this is a really important point that I don't think everyone realizes. So if you are further along than 24 weeks and you find out that there is a fatal issue with the fetus, correct? I just want to make sure I completely understand this. There is no way currently under Massachusetts state law to receive an abortion. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So you have to actually travel to another state, which, as someone who has been pregnant, traveling on its own when you're 24 plus weeks is a hard thing. And then you add in the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic.
Yep.
Wow. Okay. All right.
Yep.
Thank you for clarifying that.
And the alternative, if you don't have the financial means, you don't have the physical means to do that. So right now there's, the physical, people aren't flying. So are you going to sit in a car for driving to Colorado? Is that you have to keep with the pregnancy, knowing that the baby will not survive because it has a fatal anomaly.
Right.
So that's one of the barriers that we're trying to remove. The other barrier has to do with young people. So this is something that I'm a health policy expert. I worked on health reform in Massachusetts, and I had no idea right now. So part of the law that was created in 1974, the legislature made a provision that they said anyone under the age of 18 who wanted to get an abortion, obtain an abortion, had to get consent of both their parents.
Both.
So this is 1974. So that's shocking to you, right? And I always think parental consent is not the right term. It's actually parental attendance. Both the parents have to go with you to the appointment. So this was challenged in the courts, and they actually and I'm getting the dates right. And the courts actually in 1981 changed the law, and they said that you only needed one parental consent, one parent. So again, one parent to go with you, and there needed to be an alternative for individuals who just could not get a parent to go with them. Right. So this whole process was created in actually the 90s. It took a while, but it was it became the judicial bypass process. Mm-hmm. So the way this process works, and again, had no idea, but if you're under 18 and you go to a clinic and you meet with your medical team, whoever that is, and your healthcare providers, and you decide you want an abortion, 77% of young people under 18 get parental consent. So actually most young people get parental consent. So for the 23% of young people in Massachusetts who are unable to get that, they have to go through the judicial bypass process. Mm-hmm. So what that means is that Planned Parenthood finds them an attorney, and they meet with the attorney, and they get prepared to answer questions. And then that young person and that attorney have to walk into a courthouse, and they have to go sit in front of a judge and answer questions from the judge about, the decision they're making, and do they understand the decision they're making. Yeah. And then they get permission from the judge to get their health care, their needed health care, and go back to their medical team to get that. And this whole process, there's a lot of problems with this process, right? So let's be explicit about the problems of these. So again, only 23%. So these are not large numbers. If you are a child in DCF custody, you have to go through judicial bypass. So your foster parents can't sign this for you. DCF cannot, the state cannot be parental consent. If you are living in our state and your parents, we have a lot of young people whose parents live in other states, or they're living with aunts or grandparents. again, they need to go through this process.
Oh, wow.
If your parent is in jail or cannot come with you, again, if your parent is working the hours that clinics are open, you need to go through this process. And this process adds anywhere from 9 to 21 days delay. So we are adding, this is a barrier that we are adding. And then the worst thing about this is, and we actually have a study, our research team at Planned Parenthood has kind of looked into this and released a report almost 2 years ago now, year and a half ago, that the judicial bypass law disproportionately impacts young people of color and low income people.
Yeah.
So what happens is our surrounding states don't have parental consent laws. And so if you are a young person who has the financial means, you can drive to Vermont, you can drive to New York and get your abortion there. And so and that's not as again, my health background, like we wrote health reform in Massachusetts. We are forcing young people to leave the state to get healthcare that they should be getting in Massachusetts. So what ends up happening is you're creating health disparities and you're widening health disparities. And what we can talk more about this later, but the other thing, and especially in the time we're living in, is we are asking young people of color to go in front of a judge.
Yeah.
Right. And so in this time, you're asking them to walk into a courthouse and get permission from a judge to get healthcare that they need. And so if that young person is undocumented, has had a negative experience with the judicial court system, that does not seem like a place that we should be sending people. The two more things about this whole process that I was shocked by. Mm-hmm. So I think when the law was written in 1974, people thought the courts would kind of protect these young people. Mm. Great in theory, but in actuality, judges are not mandated reporters. So if a judge saw or believed there was trauma,
yeah,
or some criminal action, the judge can't do anything about it.
Huh.
A healthcare provider is a mandated reporter and must report it. Yeah. And so you're asking a judge you're expecting the court to do something that just isn't something that's part of their purview. And then the other thing, this always fascinated me. So there's been over 23,000 cases of judicial bypass cases since 1981. Mm-hmm. And guess how many have been denied?
Like none.
2.
Okay, all right.
And what, you were closer than most people, Meg. Good job. But of those 2, one was like overturned. It was the same judge in 1981. So literally since 1981, 23,000 cases, they've been a rubber stamp.
What's oh, hold on, we get feedback. Hold on. Let's see if that made it go away. What's striking to me, I've muted you for the moment because I don't know why there's feedback. What's striking to me is when you think about the whole process, and I'm glad you pointed that out, that of the 23,000 cases, only 2 have been denied, because I think it really does show that this isn't a process that's actually accomplishing anything. If to your point about being a mandated reporter, if that were something that was actually in a judge's purview, then perhaps there could be an argument that this process has some merits. But as you were describing the process, they go to Planned Parenthood, they find out they're pregnant, they come to the determination with their healthcare provider that an abortion makes the most sense. They get connected with an attorney, they prepare for court, they go to, potentially taking the day off of school, taking the day off of work, they get to the courthouse, they go through the process with the judge. The emotional toil, the mental toil of having to go in front of a judge at 15, 16, 17, 18 and asking for that kind of permission. And then you layer on the racial implications and that these are kids who, if they're going through this process, it's because they didn't have the ability to get parental consent. And one could, draw the connection then that they don't have the support system at home. So these are kids who already don't have that built-in support system, and now they have to go in front of a judge and put themselves sort of at the mercy of the court. And I think that that's that entire process. I mean, I'm a 36-year-old woman, and that sounds horrifying to me. Chris points out more than 28 days in most cases. I think Chris is a lawyer. I think he's talking about the delay, unless there is an affidavit from a medical provider indicating an emergent need. And I think the delay is an important piece to really emphasize as well, because many times I would imagine you don't have a lot of time to make this decision. By the time you discover you're pregnant, by the time you've sort of gone through the emotional journey of accepting that news and deciding what you want to do about it, and then you have to go through this legal process.
Yeah, can I add 2 points to that? And Chris might have better data than we have. So we say 9 to 21 days, but the one other thing, now I'm trying to think, but that you had said that about so the delay, it's unnecessary delay, right? And it is a I can't tell you. I think the first time I walked into a courthouse was probably in law school, because I had to go for a class to check it out. So yeah, for a young person to have to go in front of a judge for this permission when the judge really can't help is problematic. But the other thing that I didn't really realize why the delay is so awful, and this remembering when we were younger, Meg, but 40% of abortions in the country, but in Massachusetts, are medication abortion, which you can get up to 10 weeks. So remember, when you were young, again, you didn't really know that you were pregnant, right? Hormones are crazy. People find out later. As we get older, we can track it better. We know our bodies better. But when you're when you're young, you're in your teens, you just don't know your body as well. Right. And so young people actually find out they're pregnant much later, right? So they find out at 8 or 9 weeks, and then you add 9 to 21 days. You're adding a week to 3 weeks. You're actually taking an option away from them. Right. Like, talk about a barrier. You're taking a choice where they could have had a medication abortion, and you're taking that choice away from them, so that their choice becomes that they have to have a in-clinic abortion.
My understanding, and not a doctor, but my understanding is that the sort of medication abortion is significantly less painful and less sort of, it's much less of a process, right? So it's on your body. It's easier emotionally. Not that any of this is easy, but that it's much easier.
It's two pills. It's less costly, and so there's benefits of it, but again, it comes down to your taking away choice from that young person because of this unnecessary delay.
Yeah. So okay, so I want to do one thing, because I want to make sure, because I know one of the points of confusion I've had with a lot of folks in talking about this is how this relates to Roe versus Wade. So I want to pop this question up here. Not that I expect you by any means to be a Supreme Court case law expert here. We've got Chris watching. Chris is our legal guy, so he can help us out. But, okay, so the Roe Act is legislation here in Massachusetts, right? How does that differ from Roe versus Wade, and kind of how do you all think about the two? Because there's obviously been, a lot of concern, again, with the death of Justice Ginsburg. And I've seen it all on social media yesterday and today with the hearings for Amy Coney Barrett okay, the Supreme Court is going to, what if they rule down Roe versus Wade, or they overturn Roe versus Wade? So can you kind of just talk a little bit about that relationship between the federal level and the state level, and how you all think about that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And it's something that we've been spending a lot of time on, and I'm pulling out notes because, as I said, I was on vacation today, so I'm a little behind. But
okay. I feel so bad we brought you in on your vacation.
No, I am super excited to be here, but I'm just not as prepared as I normally would be.
I'll buy you time by showing off my Supreme Court justice mug.
I love that. I hold on. If this is show and tell, then
Always. I didn't even realize that's the one I had today. And then I was like, of course. Oh, yes. I love it. I know I've got mine over on my bookshelf.
which I've heard now is a collector's item. And they're like, I got this for a gift for $20 and now it's like $130 on.
Nice. I mean, not that I'm ever going to sell mine.
No.
I love it.
Okay.
All right. So speaking of the Supreme Court.
So let's just talk about the Supreme Court and what, RBG's legacy and what that means. So all this week we've been hearing about Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation hearings, and our the president, or the occupant of the White House, as Ayanna Pressley calls him, has vowed to only appoint justices to the Supreme Court who would overturn Roe v. Wade and strike down the Affordable Care Act, right? And so he believes that Barrett will fit this bill. So Barrett is an active and vocal threat to reproductive health and rights. She has suggested that Roe v. Wade was wrongly decided and has been openly critical of the Affordable Care Act and Roe v. Wade. She believes that judges should not uphold the law when there is a conflict with their own personal beliefs. And she's been clear that her beliefs include opposing marriage equality and that abortion is always immoral. So Barrett's record demonstrates that she will jeopardize Justice Ginsburg's long record of ensuring that everyone receives equal justice under the law. Yeah. So if she is confirmed to the Supreme Court, Roe v. Wade could be rendered meaningless, even if it's not overturned. So this is the number that I need everyone to remember. Right now, there are 17 abortion-related cases just one step away from the Supreme Court. And any one of them could undermine Roe v. Wade and dismantle abortion access. If they are dismantled, 25 million women of reproductive age live in a state where abortion could be banned.
Wow. So, okay, I just want to sit with that for a second. So 17 cases that are basically one or two steps away from the Supreme Court, 25 million women, 25 million people that, wow. I mean, that is, it really is. I mean, I think everyone is taking it seriously, but if you weren't sure, you should be now. So,
yeah. And so what happens, right? If we get another anti-abortion justice to a lifetime appointment, then all of our rights and our ability to access safe, legal abortion will be left to the state. Yeah. And what that means then, right, is that your right to an abortion is meaningless if the care is inaccessible. So if you have barriers to the care, if you put up these rules about young people accessing it, or, later in pregnancy abortions, if you have waiting times, if you put in crazy licensing rules that are, not medically necessary, you are limiting everyone's access to abortion care. This statistic always drives me crazy, but since 2011, we think that we're okay, but since 2011, more than 480 abortion restrictions have passed in states, making abortion inaccessible for many people with low income, who are Black and brown, and women who are forced to navigate racist and discriminatory systems, right? So it's healthcare inequalities affect low income and people of color much differently than they do people with means and people with access. And so some of these examples, like I said, are mandatory waiting periods, 2-trip requirements, a ban on insurance coverage, so who pays for it, which gets to, affecting low-income people more, and then a ban on telehealth abortion bans. So if her nomination is confirmed, we can no longer rely on the U.S. Supreme Court to protect us. That's why we in Massachusetts have to pass the Roe Act, because we have to have our state laws that guarantee equitable abortion access. And that's why we need to pass the Roe Act.
You perfectly preempted the next question. Why should we pass the Roe Act today? So I want to touch on a couple of things you mentioned that are really critical. I think the first one, and this is one of the things that I want everyone who feels or who is opposed to the Roe Act to really think about what I'm about to say, which is people are still getting abortions without the Roe Act, and we'll still continue to get them. We'll travel to Colorado, we'll travel to neighboring states. Passing these laws that make it harder does not make them go away. It just makes them less safe, more expensive, more difficult. And what you're doing by creating laws that result in that is you're making it more likely that women will die from them. You're making it more likely that people who really need them cannot get them. It's putting people in, it's really jeopardizing the lives of people who need abortions, instead of accomplishing what I think people want to accomplish, which is to not kill, fetuses that become babies. But it's not having that effect, and I think it's really critical that people understand that. I think the second thing is one of the things that's been the most fascinating to me as I've gotten more into policy over the last few years. I mean, I've really become a sort of a policy geek, and I love this stuff now. But is sort of these nuances in how, I used to be one of those people who thought, okay, we've got gay marriage, we've got Roe versus Wade, we're good. We passed those things, we're good. But when you dig into them and you realize all of these sort of, I don't mean minor in the sense of an impact, but minor in the sense of how well known they are. All of these minor laws really massively suck the wind out of the ability of something like Roe versus Wade. So the waiting periods, the not allowing insurance to cover abortions, things like that, and they really do kind of undercut the ability for people to get access to reproductive health care. And I think that's what people really need to start paying attention to, because this isn't just happening in reproductive health care, it's happening in every policy aspect of our society. We'll sort of pass the broad law up here, so we think we're good, and then all of these other laws get passed that really undercut what we were trying to accomplish. So I think that's a really good point that you made. And I also, want to say, you talked about at the beginning, things like the 24-hour waiting period, which have been on the books here in Massachusetts for years and aren't enforced, but could be. They are still the law.
Yep. We are really fortunate to have Attorney General Maura Healey, who does not enforce that. But, that's what we have. And as legal people and as policy people, I always say that as policymakers, policymakers' job is to protect the most vulnerable. Yeah. And to get rid of these barriers, you're really protecting the most vulnerable. And I think that's a nice lens to put on it, is, again, you're helping the people that really need the help and the protections who need the protections. Yeah. And we can't depend on the Supreme Court for doing that. We can't depend on the federal government for doing that. We actually have to look for our state lawmakers to protect our citizens and residents in our state.
Yeah. So I love this. And I want to get, I know we've talked about all of these elements probably already, but I want to just get very clear for people, because I know one of the things that a lot of people will say to me in conversation is, okay, I understand that Roe Act is good, we need it, but what exactly does it do? And I think there's this idea that it legalizes abortions in Massachusetts, and then people don't, that's what most people think it does. So can you walk through, just kind of checklist, what some of the things are that it actually does?
Yeah, so I like to think that there's kind of like a couple of big buckets of what it does, right? Overall, it takes down barriers to abortion. And so one is the later in pregnancy exemption that it puts in there. So that's kind of a big bucket. Mm-hmm. This young people getting rid of judicial bypass and parental consent that's been on the law book since 1974. It gets rid of that. It adds equitable access by making sure that abortion care exists for all pregnancy-related care for people in Mass Health and other healthcare programs, so that you don't exclude it. And reduces the stigma around abortion by, again, getting rid of some of those ugly words and unnecessary. So there's a lot of, when they wrote the law in 1974, in response to Roe v. Wade, it really was it was limiting access to abortion, right? So there was a lot of ugly language in the law that now, 40 years later, is not the language that we should do. There's actually language in on the law books, like criminal penalties for doctors who provide abortion care. So again, right now, not something that we worry about, but it's in the law books, and we shouldn't have laws on the law books that aren't. This is not changing Roe v. Wade. This is really reducing some of the barriers that need to be gone in Massachusetts.
Yeah. And to that point, it's important, even if Roe v. Wade stays. And I think that's, what we're part of this too. We've talked a lot about how the Roe Act is critical if Roe v. Wade goes away, but it's actually critical regardless.
Yeah, this is real people every day whose lives are impacted by these decisions and by what the laws are, and having to make really personal decisions, and having, courts make it for them, or be a part of it, as opposed to them and their medical team.
Well, and I think, and I don't want to go too deep into details, for anyone who's watching for whom this may be traumatic, but I think that's one of the things that perhaps gets lost in conversations about not just the Roe Act, but really any sort of access to abortion is, it's easy enough to think of ourselves and think, well, this isn't an issue for me, or I would never get an abortion, but it's a very different story. I have a friend who found out about, some difficulties, with her pregnancy very late in the pregnancy, and they chose to keep the baby. But, I can understand that process that a parent goes through. And so I think we have to remember that these are real people, and that nobody wants to have an abortion, that people who, for whom an abortion is the appropriate medical care, it's a difficult decision, and it's a heartbreaking decision, and it's one that you come to with your doctor, with your medical team. And it's important that relationship be respected, because I was talking to somebody who, told me a very tragic story about, his wife having to carry, the fetus of their future child, until birth, because, she was not allowed to have it removed. I mean, these are real people who are going through this. And I think it's very easy to say, well, we would never do that, but we don't know until we're in that situation. And we have to remember that this really is about a person's body, and about the laws we're putting on a person's body, and their ability to make decisions about that body, which are at stake here, which are at risk here. And it's very terrifying. So, just to bum us out.
Yeah. So how about I talk a little bit about where the bill is, since we did a deep dive into the bill. And if I know, Meg, your website has some information. Also, feel free to go to the Planned Parenthood Advocacy Fund's information for our fact sheets, and get more information there, and reach out if you have more specific questions. But so I used to work at the State House, so I like talking about, as a policy person, life at the State House. So the State House, every year we have a 2-year session in Massachusetts, and every year between 7,000 to 8,000 bills are filed. And of those 7,000 to 8,000 bills in a normal session, in a 2-year session, about 300 to 400 become law. And of those 300 to 400, I like to say 330 of them are naming a gazebo, or making a street a highway, right? They're not significant policy. But we do significant policy every session. whether it be the educational funding bill, whether it be a criminal justice bill last session, whether it be a healthcare reform 12 years ago. So we do policy changes, but there's a process, and not every bill gets passed its first session. The actually average bill takes six years, and as a policy person, 6 years. So that's like the average. And there's some bills that are refiled every session and just never pass. There's some gazebos there who never get named, right? But the way that the process works is you get 7,000 to 8,000 bills filed in January, and they're sent to committees, and the committees work on them. And we, as the Roe Act Coalition, and we became a statewide coalition led by Planned Parenthood, the ACLU, and NARAL, and then we have over 100 organizations, from the Massachusetts Teachers Association to the Nurses Association to Mass Medical Society. Lots of indivisible groups, lots of partner organizations, and lots of individuals have supported this. And we got co-sponsors. We got over 100 co-sponsors up at the State House who said they supported this bill. We had a really great hearing June of 2019 now, so over a year ago, and the committee was ready to work on it, and then the pandemic hit, and so the bill was supposed to be reported out of committee pre-pandemic. Pandemic hit, and so now it has a report out date November 12th. And so we are actively working to get it out of committee by November 12th. We have been told that the committee and the chair, who is Chair Claire Cronin, is working on it. We are continuing to have the conversations. It is a process. And so all these conversations that we are having now, we are having with elected officials. I encourage everyone to reach out to your elected officials. And then the ones who are not co-sponsors or don't engage, check out who we endorse and the candidates who have committed to supporting the Roe Act and removing barriers from abortion care. I think it's really important. It's why I'm here, to support those candidates who, see policy work and see the Massachusetts we all want to be a part of in the same way. So we actually have a petition going around that we are trying to get people to sign on to. I encourage all of you guys to sign on to that petition because we want to show that this is not only policymakers who want this, but people who are watching these hearings and learning about the next Supreme Court justice and her stance on the issues, and really worried, as they should be, about the rights that we have as people and women and our access to abortion care.
So, okay, so that was really helpful. And I want to clarify something. So it's still in committee. And which committee is it?
The Judicial Committee.
Judicial Committee. Okay, perfect. So, and just for everyone's sake, for those who aren't familiar with exactly how this works, so committees can do a couple of things, right? So they can either vote it out to send it to a full vote. They can decide not to vote it out, or they can send it to study. Is that correct?
So sending it to study is not voting it out, right? So they can report it out, send it to study, or just not do anything on it.
And to be clear, sending it to study is basically killing it, but in a nicer way.
Correct.
Right,
yeah.
Right. So a few options here. So it's still in committee. So the goal then would obviously be to get the committee members to really push to vote it out, so that we can get a full vote, because then it will go to each body, the Senate and the House, and they'll do their own vote. And then hopefully it passes.
Yep. And so what normally happens there, right, is that a bill goes to each house first. So we are hopeful that the Roe Act will pass the House first, and then it'll go to the Senate. And your hope is that they're similar bills, and then it gets sent to the governor for him to sign. In the cases where they're not similar, they create a conference committee to hash out the differences. So police accountability, the telemedicine bill, which is also a priority of ours, is actually also in conference right now. So there's a couple of different conference committees going up there. Just for everyone to know is, again, the State House just like all of us, are working virtually right now. And so they're trying to do all their work virtually and not meeting in person. And they have to figure out their budget. And Chair Cronin, who is the chair of Judiciary, is also one of the conference committees on the police accountability bill. And so because that's already in conference, we, full expectation that will get to the governor's desk. And so that's her number one priority right now. And then we are hopeful that the next priority will be the Roe Act.
Yeah, as it should be. And I think you said something which is really important. I want to just stress for everyone is to call your elected officials. If they are a supporter, call them and thank them and remind them that this is important. And if they're not, call them and encourage them to be, because this is a really important bill. And it's, if it doesn't pass this session, then it essentially has to start over, right? I mean, and we're talking about a 2-year period. And I think that's one of the challenging things about the way our legislative process works is, with the exception of emergency legislation, you really do have a long waiting time. So thinking about everything that may change over the next few years in this country. And again, I want to reiterate, this legislation is important regardless of any of that, but especially because of that, not wanting to wait 2 more years to see this important legislation pass. So is really critical.
Yeah, I think it's important. I think the pandemic, 2 things to add to that, Meg. One is I think the pandemic gave us some interesting opportunities. And so the legislature, they are working from home. So that means we can call them and you can email them. They are still working. They are not, they are working as diligently as they did before. And so I think reach out and weigh in about what your priorities are and what your issues are on reproductive healthcare, on any of the things that are important to you. Please reach out. And then I think the other thing, the opportunity it gave us is normally the legislative session ends at the end of July, but because of the pandemic, it got extended to the end of December. And so normally right now we would have actually known what happened with it. We would have happily been done with. But it gave us an opportunity to kind of work and get a stronger bill and have some more time.
Yeah, which is not a bad thing. So in our last few minutes, I wanted to actually swing back to a couple of things we talked about earlier, because these are actually 2 pieces that I know are particularly controversial to some people about this bill. And so I want to make sure we really cover these to clear up confusion, and also to help folks who are watching live have some talking points if they are having a conversation with someone who is, in theory, in favor of abortion access, but is stuck on the Roe Act because of these issues. And for everyone watching live, feel free to drop any questions you have in the comments. We're happy to answer those as well. But the first is going back to young people. And I know you did such a great job of explaining the process, the judicial bypass process, if they are not able to obtain parental consent. But one thing I'd love for you to touch on is kind of who this applies to, because again, I think a lot of us, when we think about policy and we think about things like this, we picture our own situations and we sort of think, well, if that ever happened to me, I would just go to my parents. And, people have expressed this concern about young people, being able to obtain abortions without some kind of oversight. And so I would just love for you to maybe speak a bit about why this is so important, why just going to your parents and getting that parental consent is not an option for, I think you said 23% of young people. And that's just, I'm assuming, just the ones we know about or the ones who go through the process. There are many more who leave the state, presumably.
Correct. Yeah. So I always, when I talk about this and talk about it with people who, have the selfishly, I think we all do this. You kind of think, how does this apply to me? And I think this is not actually applying to us, whether we're over 18 or we live in the suburbs or we're not Black and brown or we're not low income. And so 77% of young people have that parent that can go with them, is making the decisions as they feel they have a relationship that they can go to. 77%. That's actually most people. This is actually protecting the vulnerable 23% who for whatever reason, it's that they're, like I said, their parent, they're in DCF custody, their parents in jail, their parents live in another country. I was recently told about a situation where the young person was living with an aunt in Massachusetts, and the parents lived in Guatemala. So there's no way that a parental consent can happen. And for some young people, it's actually, it's a threat to tell their parents, right? It's fear of being kicked out of their home, of being shamed, of being abused because of it. And so, young people are pretty resilient. I think something the pandemic has also taught us is how resilient students can be. And I think young people know how to navigate the system. And so, it's not an easy system to navigate. And I think a system that was put in place to add these extra barriers to make the clock run out isn't really protecting the young people. And I think for us, like, to look beyond our own, whatever lens we're looking at it, and look at it from the lens of this young person and what hoops and barriers we're asking this young person to go to. And again, like, people with means and people, if you have access to your own car and you're 17 years old, you can drive to Vermont. You have an iPhone and you can look up where to go, and you can get in a car and go and do that. So these are really the most vulnerable in our society. And so this is really about removing barriers to them. We have a healthcare system. I think something that I'm really proud of the work that we do at Planned Parenthood is we really look at all of our policy work, intersectionality. And I know, Meg, we were talking about some of the other bills, and I'm going to go a little beyond reproductive justice here, but, we're big believers in economic justice and social justice and reproductive justice and racial justice are all intertwined. And so to us, passing the Roe Act is really important, supporting the Roe Act, but so is the police accountability bill, which was a priority for us. So is the Safe Communities Act and Immigrants, right? You don't necessarily need to be an undocumented immigrant to understand that we have barriers and racism and need to change the laws that we have on the books, right? To protect, again, the most vulnerable in our society. Obviously, the police accountability bill was all about protecting members of our society. And, we can all look through it through different lenses and know that the whole reason we do all this work is to get justice for all. And the way you do that is to look at these with different lenses and kind of protect the most vulnerable amongst us. The Healthy Youth Act is also something that I know in our questionnaire we asked you about and you fully support. And, it's protecting young people from harmful abstinence-only sex education. And that's really important. And again, you have to take yourself out of it, of how you were raised or what resources you had, and think about people who don't have the same opportunity. And that's your job as a legislator, to kind of look at it with that intersectional lens. And, your goal in government is to help more people. And so I think it's looking at it from a different lens. And how do we, something that the legislature did do really well is pass the voting expansion law. And again, for people that don't feel safe voting in a pandemic and going to, their polling location, and they need vote by mail, that's looking at it through a different lens that we just haven't looked at before.
I think that's the perfect way to put it, because, when I really do sit back and kind of examine my privilege from a variety of angles and think about my childhood and growing up and every, step of the way, how if I had been faced with any adverse situation, my ability to get an abortion or to get healthcare, to get birth control, any of these things, it is very different from many other people's. And that's really, it's one of the reasons why I'm very proud to support the Roe Act, because it is truly about so much more than just abortion access. It is about fairness and equity and justice. And it really, I think, talking about this really highlights how that's not something we have right now here in Massachusetts. And I think that's very surprising to a lot of people. But it's a really important conversation to continue to have, because across all the spectrums that you mentioned, racial, environmental, education, the economy, housing, reproductive, healthcare, we have massive inequities, and we really need to address every single one of them through this kind of intersectional policy work that y'all are doing, and that we're spending a lot of time talking about. So I think that's I learned, like I was telling you, I think at the beginning, when it came to young people, I learned so much about these challenges for young people because of the judicial bypass system, which, again, on their face, when I sort of initially heard about it, it wasn't intuitive to me, because it was a different experience than I've had. But when you learn about it, you realize how much policies that, like the ones that exist on our books today, really do hurt. You said it, Black and brown communities, women, lower income communities, and there's this massive inequity that we need to address. So I'm very grateful for you addressing that, and I think for anyone talking about the Roe Act, understanding that that's really what this is about is important. So I want to do one more controversial one that I know has come up a lot. And again, we touched on this at the beginning, but I think this is important to hit on again, because it has come up, especially a bit in our district, with people. And I know with my opponent, this is one of his stated concerns about the Roe Act, which is basically the allowance, essentially, for abortion after 24 weeks in cases of fatal fetal diagnosis. And that is a tongue twister, so I don't blame you for tripping up on that one early. I had to read it to make sure I said it correctly. So obviously you talked about the fact that the Roe Act would essentially allow for this. Can you just kind of touch again on why, I guess, what is the case now, and why this is so important, this aspect of the Roe Act?
Yeah, so right now in Massachusetts, so one of the things that the 1974 law put in place was that in Massachusetts, there's no abortions after 24 weeks. So that's it. After 24 weeks, no more abortion. And so right now, under our current law, if people have this unimaginable situation, and you were talking about one of your friends earlier, right? But they need to end their pregnancy for a serious medical condition, they can't do it. Right now, if it's after 24 weeks, they can't do it. And so this forces people to fly to other states, to travel to other states. Colorado is where most people go to access an abortion later in pregnancy. So the hope of the Roe Act is to improve access for abortions after 24 weeks of pregnancy in cases of fatal diagnoses. So this is fatal diagnosis. The fetus will not survive. So they know that the fetus will not survive. The doctors have determined that. But right now, if you find that out in Massachusetts, you are not allowed to have an abortion, and so you have to travel somewhere else. This is really a gut-wrenching situation if you actually know anyone that has had to live through this, because at 24 weeks, this was a fetus that you were planning to carry to full term. And so just to know that that the baby will not survive, and you want to terminate your pregnancy, but you have to travel out of state to do that.
Or be forced to go through and finish the pregnancy and deliver this baby. And I mean, I know, this, I feel like this has been quite the talk recently. Was it Chrissy Teigen? I think, is that who I'm thinking of, who recently posted on social media? I think that's who it is. I'm not as into the pop stuff as everyone is, but who posted about, her own, it may have been a miscarriage, so I might be confusing the exact facts of the situation, but very late term. And I think it is heart-wrenching. And, when you get to that point, you were intending on delivering the baby. And it really is to force a person to go through that process and finish out, bring the pregnancy to term, I think is not only heart-wrenching, but inhumane. And so I think that's what's really important about this. And just to clarify, because this is one of the things that I think people who are not in support of the Roe Act try to use. This does not allow anyone to get an abortion after 24 weeks. Like, let's be very clear about that.
Yep. I think what we like to say, Meg, you're not a physician and I'm not a physician. And so we believe that these are decisions between a patient and their physician, their medical team. This is not a decision that needs to be made in a courthouse, and not decisions that needed to be made by policymakers from 40 years ago.
Sorry, I was muted because my son was screaming. So good screaming, not bad screaming. But yes, no, I absolutely agree with that. And now he's going to come storming in here. This is going to be fun. All right, we are going to wrap it up because we are coming up just upon 8 o'clock. One last question, super easy question for you. How can people support the Roe Act? Here he comes.
Hello. No, great question. So go to our website, Planned Parenthood Advocacy Fund, sign up. We have lots of emails. Please sign the petition that I talked about, and I should have a link, but it's all on our website. And call your elected official. If you live in Meg's district, your current senator is not a co-sponsor, but I think these are conversations that he should hear, and know that Planned Parenthood Advocacy Fund endorsed Meg and said she will be a Roe Act champion. And so we are really excited to get to work with you. I think these are really important conversations to have, and I really appreciate that you are willing to have them. And I think that shows of what type of legislator you'll be, and that you're willing to have these difficult conversations, but learn. And again, 8,000 bills, nobody's an expert on 8,000 bills, right? But you learn and you have these conversations. And so I think for people who are out there listening, contact your elected officials and tell them you support the Roe Act and you really want to see it passed by the end of the year.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I dropped the link in the comments. So for anyone watching, the link to the Planned Parenthood Advocacy, hopefully I got the right. Yeah, Advocacy Fund is in there. So definitely check them out, support them. I think y'all do phone banks and lots of great stuff as well. And I appreciate that, because I think, one of the things that we're trying to do, and we've been trying to do this whole campaign, is really to educate people. We did an event like this on qualified immunity, where, we've done some others as well. And these are the types of things that we will continue to do when I'm in the state Senate, because I've been on the Mass Senate website. It's not easy to learn about bills. It's not easy to learn about these issues. Planned Parenthood, thankfully, has a great website for the Roe Act, but it's really important we understand about these and even some of these nuances about the components of the Roe Act. Most people aren't aware of until we educate ourselves. So I'm just really grateful to you and for Planned Parenthood, both for endorsing us in our campaign, but also just having this conversation, because it's how we learn. It's how we continue to create policy that actually does support everyone and not just some. I'm excited to work with you and continue this conversation and actually I hope the Roe Act is passed before I get in there, but if it's not, I'm excited to be a proud champion of it.
Well, and we will have lots of other bills for you to. So we still need to pass the Healthy Youth Act and telemedicine. And I think we're going to be having to defend healthcare, which includes reproductive and sexual healthcare. I'm going to be remiss. Give me 1 second to do also go to our website, but also our Facebook feed and our Twitter feed. Our amazing digital comms person actually lives in your district. I think she's on this, Caitlin Solaris, but check out our tweets and our Facebook feed. We do events all the time, but it's the quickest way to find out how to do it. And you have a constituent of yours who gets it.
I love it. And we'll drop links to all of that after in the comments here as well for everyone. So thank you so much for being here. This was such a pleasure. I appreciate you coming in on your day off.
It was lovely to have this conversation with you. Yeah.
Oh, great.
Everyone, remember to take your census, do your census. Today's the last day or tomorrow's the last day. And also make a plan to vote and vote for Meg.
I love it. Thank you. Yeah, census. I think I saw by like 6 a.m. tomorrow, so you have very little time. It's running out. If you don't have a plan to vote, megwheeler.com/vote. We've got all the hours, locations, everything. Thank you to everyone who's here watching us live, to everyone who watches this on the replay, and thank you again to you and everyone from Planned Parenthood for your support. Really appreciate this conversation, and have a good night, everyone.